Hello, this is Ben Television News Roundup, a compilation of major news stories in the weekend. I'm Tunde Alabi. Thank you for being part of the program today. Prime Minister David Cameron has said his government has put over £1 billion into the HMRC in order to increase its capability to collect taxes. The Prime Minister was reacting to Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn's allegation that government was committed to cutting HMRC's budget by £400 million by 2020.
Panama Papers, Mr. Speaker, exposed the scandalous situation where wealthy individuals seem to believe that corporation tax and other taxes are something optional. Indeed, as the member for Rutland and Melton informed us, it's only for low achievers, apparently. So, when the HMRC says that the tax gap is £34 billion, why then is he cutting HMRC staff by 20% and cutting down tax offices, which loses the expertise of people to close that tax gap?
Well, I'm glad he wants to get on to our responsibilities to pay our taxes. I think that's very important. I thought his tax return was a metaphor for Labour policy. It was late, it was chaotic, it was inaccurate, it was uncosted. That's exactly Turning to the specific questions, he's absolutely right. He's absolutely right to identify the tax gap, and that is why we closed off loopholes in the last Parliament, equivalent of £12 billion. We aim to close off loopholes in this Parliament, equivalent to £16 billion. So the HMRC is taking very strong action, backed by this government, backed by the Chancellor, legislated for by this House, and I think I'm right in saying that since 2010, we've put actually over £1 billion into HMRC to increase its capabilities to collect the tax that people should be paying. The difference, I think, between this side of the House and the Right Honourable Gentleman is we believe in setting low tax rates and encouraging people to pay them, and it's working.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the Prime Minister for drawing attention to my own tax return. There, warts and all, the warts being my handwriting, all being my generous donation to HMRC. I actually paid more tax than some companies owned by people that he might know quite well. The Prime Minister isn't... Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister isn't cutting tax abuse, he's cutting down on tax collectors. The tax collected helps to fund our NHS and all the other services. Last month, the OBR reported that HMRC doesn't have the necessary resources to tackle offshore tax disclosures. The government is committed to taking £400 million out of HMRC's budget by 2020. Will he now commit to reversing that cut so that we can collect the tax that will help to pay for the services?
I'm afraid his figures, rather like his tax return, his figures aren't entirely accurate. At the summer budget 2015, we gave an extra £800 million to HMRC to fund additional work to tackle tax evasion and non-compliance between now and 2021. This is going to enable HMRC to recover a cumulative £7.2 billion in tax over the next 5 years. And we've already brought in more than £2 billion from offshore tax evaders since 2010. But the point I'd make to him, I think we should try and bring some consensus to this issue. For years in this country, Labour governments and Conservative governments had an attitude to the Crown dependencies and the overseas territories that their tax affairs were a matter for them, and their compliance affairs were a matter for them, and their transparency was a matter for them. This government has changed that. We got the overseas territories, we got the Crown dependencies round the table. We said you've got to have registers of ownership, you've got to collaborate with the UK government, you've got to make sure people don't hide their taxes, and it's happening. So when he gets to his feet, he should welcome the fact that huge progress has been made, raising taxes, sorting out the overseas territories and Crown dependencies, closing the tax gap, getting businesses to pay more, giving international leadership to this whole issue, all things that never happened under Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Prime Minister for that answer. The only problem with it is that the Red Book states HMRC spending will fall from £3.3 billion to £2.9 billion by 2020. And In regard to UK Crown dependencies and overseas territories, only 2 days ago the Prime Minister said that he had agreed that they will provide, these are the overseas territories, they will provide UK law enforcement and tax agencies with full access to information on the beneficial ownership of companies. There seems to be some confusion here because the Chief Minister of Jersey said this is in response to a need for information without delay where terrorist activities are involved. Obviously, we welcome his commitment to fighting terrorism, but is Jersey and all the other dependencies actually going to provide beneficial ownership information or not?
The short answer to that is yes, they are. And that is what's such a big breakthrough. Look, I totally accept they're not going as far as us because we are publishing a register of beneficial ownership. That will happen in June. We'll be one of the only countries in the world to do so. I think Norway and Spain are the others. What the overseas territories and crown dependencies are doing is making sure that we have full access to registers of beneficial ownership to make sure that people aren't evading or avoiding their taxes. Now, in the interests of giving full answers to his questions, let me give him the figures for full-time equivalents in HMRC in terms of compliance. The numbers are going from 25,000 in 2010 to 26,798 in 2015. It's not how much money you spend on an organisation, it's how many people you can actually have out there collecting the taxes and making sure the forms are properly filled in.
The Panama Papers, which revealed several offshore accounts held by individuals and politicians, have raised new concern over hidden money that may be used to fund terror groups. The lake has increased pressure on politicians to tighten financial rules around the world, especially in the United States.
Terror attacks require money for explosives, travel, and weapons. Blocking funds for violent extremist groups is the key to reducing their threat. Terrorists used some companies incorporated in Panama to secretly move cash through firms with hidden ownership, and experts say the disclosures may fuel new prosecution efforts.
We know from the Panama Papers that there were terrorist organizations that were setting up these shell companies, Hezbollah, for example.
In Congress, a House committee has been holding hearings on terrorist finance. Justice Department officials say they are aware of the newest reports and are reviewing information. Former U.S. Senator Carl Levin says stronger rules for requiring disclosure of company ownership would help stop terrorist finances. In a newspaper article, he told officials not to waste the political opportunity fueled by public anger over the scandal. Senate Banking Committee member Elizabeth Warren urges the Treasury Department to also investigate. Experts say tighter rules make it harder to move money for terrorist operations, so terrorists move to older but harder to trace methods.
And that's what gets so challenging to track. I mean, the money changer in Mogadishu or the money changer in Tehran, how are they getting their money? Is it coming in suitcases rather than are they hiding it offshore in Panama? That's what the major concern is with the people that try to counter terrorism finance.
But legitimate charities that raise money for people in war-torn places are seeing banks abruptly close their accounts, making it difficult to pay staff and meet other expenses.
It's now to a point where a lot of the major Muslim-based charities in the U.S. that work internationally are one bank away from going out of business.
High risk and low reward make banks reluctant to have anything to do with organizations working in some conflict areas like Somalia. Banks tend to make very little money from charities' relatively small accounts, but in some cases have had to pay large fines for violating sanctions. It's all part of a fast-evolving, high-stakes financial battlefield.
Also, the U.S. President Barack Obama says his top priority at the moment remains the security of the United States, the safety of the American people, and defeating ISIL and other terrorist organizations around the world. He revealed this while reviewing U.S. state of security with service chiefs at the Central Intelligence Agency Center.
As President and Commander-in-Chief, my top priority, above all else, is the security of the United States and the safety of the American people. And that means preventing terrorist attacks, and at the moment, it is focused on making sure that we are dismantling and destroying the ISIL network. I just met with my National Security Council as part of our regular effort to review and constantly intensify our campaign against ISIL. And I want to thank Director Brennan and everybody here at the Central Intelligence Agency for hosting us and for their critical contributions to this fight. In late February, at our meeting at the State Department, I directed my team to continue accelerating this campaign on all fronts, and we have. This remains a difficult fight and a complex one, involving many countries and different communities in Syria and in Iraq. It is a military campaign and a counterterrorism effort, but it also depends on a whole range of political issues that face these two countries. As we've seen so tragically, from Brussels to Istanbul to Iraq, where ISIL slaughtered children watching soccer, these depraved terrorists still have the ability to inflict horrific violence on the innocent, to the revulsion of the entire world. With attacks like these, ISIL hopes to weaken our collective resolve. And once again, they have failed. Their barbarism only stiffens our unity and determination to wipe this vile terrorist organization off the face of the earth. Today, on the ground in Syria and in Iraq, ISIL is on the defensive. Our 66-member coalition, including Arab partners, is on the offensive. We have momentum, and we intend to keep that momentum. Our air campaign, more than 11,500 strikes so far, continues to pound ISIL targets. It's harder than ever for them to move and for their masses to, or for them to mass forces. When they try, we take them out. ISIL still has managed to advance in some areas of Syria and Iraq, but it has not had a single successful major offensive operation on the ground there since last summer. So it's been nearly a year since they were able to mount a major successful offensive operation. We continue to take out their leaders, their commanders, and those plotting terrorist attacks. For ISIL's leadership, it has been a bad few months. Coalition forces captured Abu Dawood, a leader of its chemical weapons program, giving us critical information that's allowed us to unleash more strikes against those sites. We have removed Abu Sarah, ISIL financier in Iraq, Haji Iman, their finance chief, Izzat al-Jabouri, an ISIL figure in northern Iraq, not to mention a number of top foreign terrorist fighters. They are off the field. And in the days and weeks ahead, we intend to take out more. Every day, ISIL leaders wake up and understand that it could be their last. With coalition support, local forces continue to push ISIL back in Iraq. In Anbar province, Iraqi forces have consolidated their gains around Ramadi and pushed up the Euphrates River Valley, liberating several villages from ISIL and retaking parts of the town of Heat. In a recent offensive in the Tigris River Valley, Iraqi forces have pushed towards Mosul. And as Secretary Kerry made clear in his visit to Baghdad last week, we will continue to assist Iraq, and so must the entire world, as it works to stabilize liberated areas and promote governance and development that is inclusive of all Iraqi communities so that ISIL cannot return. Meanwhile, in Syria, a coalition of local forces, some backed by U.S. Special Operations Forces, continue to make progress, pushing ISIL out of the strategic town of al-Shadidi. ISIL was dug in there, and that battle was expected to last several weeks. Instead, ISIL was defeated in several days. With this, we've severed a critical supply line between ISIL strongholds of Raqqa in Syria and Mosul in Iraq, tightening the squeeze on ISIL in both areas. In this offensive alone, these local forces in Syria have pushed ISIL out of about 2,800 square miles. In the north, fighting continues as local forces fight to eject ISIL from its last pocket along the border with Turkey. In other words, the ISIL core in Syria and Iraq continues to shrink. The ranks of fighters are estimated to be at the lowest levels in about 2 years, and more of them are realizing that their cause is lost. Our cyber operations are disrupting their command and control and communications. We continue to target ISIL's financial infrastructure, including its oil wells, refineries, and supply lines. We've reduced their oil production and their oil revenue, and every dollar we deny them means one less dollar to pay their fighters and to fund their terror. As I've said repeatedly, the only way to truly destroy ISIL is to end the Syrian civil war that ISIL has exploited. So we continue to work for a diplomatic end to this awful conflict. The cessation of hostilities in the Syrian civil war has largely held for about 6 weeks. It has reduced the violence, although not eliminated it. But that reduction is meaningful, and it's allowed some humanitarian aid to reach the Syrian people. So the cessation has saved lives, but as we're seeing around Aleppo and other areas, the cessation is tenuous and under strain. We've seen repeated violations by the Assad regime, continued attacks by al-Qaeda's al-Nusra affiliate, and many Syrians continue to be deprived of desperately needed food, water, and medicine. Talks are now resuming in Geneva, and the United States will continue to do everything that we can to help the cessation succeed and to advance a political solution to the Syrian civil war. And that includes a vision endorsed by the UN Security Council, including Russia, a process that brings all Syrians together under a transitional governing body, a new constitution, and free elections.
World Bank Group President Jim Yong Kim has announced the World Bank plans to invest $2.5 billion over the next 5 years on education projects that benefit girl child in developing countries. Michelle Obama, the wife of U.S. President Barack Obama, has been in the forefront of girl child education campaigns.
Right now, around the world, 62 million girls are not in school, and about half of these girls are adolescents. Not only do we need to get more girls into school, but we also need to ensure that they can stay in school and receive a quality secondary education. You don't have to be an economist here at the World Bank to know that unleashing the full economic potential of half the population can drive the growth and prosperity of nations. And today, I'm so pleased with the strong encouragement of First Lady Michelle Obama that we plan to invest $2.5 billion over the next 5 years in education programs. These programs will benefit adolescent girls in developing countries so that they can stay in school. Thank you, Mrs. Obama, for speaking up for girls around the world and using your public platform to spark action. Please join me in welcoming First Lady Michelle Obama.
Well, good morning, everyone. Hi. This is an impressive group. It is truly a pleasure and an honor to be here today, and thank you so much for having me. Let's just take a moment. $2.5 billion in support of adolescent girls' education over the next 5 years. That is truly amazing. And this isn't just a breathtaking investment of resources. It's also a powerful statement of mission. It's an expression of our belief in the power of education to transform the lives and prospects of millions of girls worldwide, as well as the prospects of their families, their communities, and of course their countries. Why do we still too often value girls simply for their bodies instead of their minds? As both a woman and as the mother of 2 beautiful daughters, because when I travel the world and I meet girls who are so bright and so hungry to go to school, I see myself in these girls. I see my daughters in these girls. And none of us, not a single person in this room would ever dream of not educating our own daughters. None of us would dream of consigning our girls to a life of poverty, illiteracy, or abuse. So why would we accept this fate for any girl on this planet?
2 years on since the abduction of the Chibok girls by Boko Haram in northeastern Nigeria, parents and family of the 219 abducted girls have continued to live in uncertainty about the whereabouts of the girls.
Life in Nigeria's northeast hasn't been the same since Boko Haram took up arms. The insurgent group's 7-year campaign to impose strict Islamic law in Nigeria's north has torn apart communities, displaced more than 2 million people, and left 20,000 people dead. But few have suffered like these 4 men. Their daughters were taken by Boko Haram in its most infamous crime, the 2014 kidnapping of 219 schoolgirls from the government secondary school in the town of Chibok.
Whenever I think of my daughter, I start shaking, like I have a fever.
This is where it happened. The militants stormed the dormitory in the night and herded the girls away. The government vowed to rebuild the school. Almost 2 years later, the buildings have been demolished, but nothing has replaced them. Boko Haram wasn't finished with Chibok. Militants briefly overran the town in November 2014. In January, 2 suicide bombers attacked a market in the town, killing at least 10 people. Several of the girls' families have fled. Some have settled here in the state capital, Maiduguri. The uncertainty about the girls has taken a toll.
To say that she's alive or she's dead, that we saw the corpse, we will be okay than now that she is in bush that we don't know where about.
Yakubu Nkeke, chairman of an association of the Chibok parents of the missing girls, says 18 mothers and fathers have died since the mass kidnapping.
This kind of incidents bring a lot of sickness. You know, you are not in peace of mind. You can't have time properly for your feeding. You are living in fear, thinking of your young one in the hand of captors. You know, anything may attack you and easily you lose your life.
The kidnapping was condemned internationally and sparked daily demonstrations across Nigeria. Nigeria's new president and generals vowed to bring back the girls last year, but no one has been rescued. The fathers of the missing schoolgirls can do little more than seek solace in each other's company.
With my friends and colleagues, sometimes I just forget, but when I'm alone, I start thinking about my daughter.
Together, they wait and hope.
Syrian government forces and their allies have clashed with opposition fighters in Aleppo as diplomats prepared for the new round of talks on Syria that held last Wednesday. The violence has been condemned as a betrayal of the ceasefire agreement.
Syria's army, backed by the Russian Air Force, has staged the siege of rebel-held Aleppo. Fierce fighting between the two sides is in violation of the February 27th truce. Each blames the other for the breaches. The United States has called for the rival sides to concentrate their efforts on fighting terrorist groups.
Secretary Kerry, in fact, expressed this concern to Foreign Minister Lavrov and also discussed how to make certain in the next days that every extra effort is made in order to sustain and solidify the cessation of hostilities. And that includes working to define where the different fighting groups are located and to make sure we're concentrating our efforts on Daesh and Nusra, who have not signed on to the cessation of hostilities.
The United Nations Special Envoy for Syria is meeting with regional stakeholders in preparations for this week's Geneva talks.
The Geneva talks, next phase, are crucially important because we will be focusing in particular on the political transition, on governance, and constitutional principles.
Syria is preparing for parliamentary elections Wednesday.
The large number of candidates indicates that more Syrians want to participate in political affairs. Everyone wants to look for a proper answer for political progress.
Russia's support for Syrian President Bashar al-Assad complicates the talks as the opposition insists that Assad can play no role in a transitional government.
We're working on finding a democratic, pluralistic civil rule where all rights and duties are equal. There is no difference between one citizen and another, not in terms of nationalism or sectarianism, nor in terms of denomination, absolutely not. We must live like this in Syria.
But the government is adamant that in such a democratic society, people have the right to decide through election whether they want Assad for president or not.
And with that, so we conclude the news roundup for this week. Thank you for being part of the program today. I'm Tunde Alabi, and enjoy the rest of your week. Bye. part of our continued efforts to reach the African and other ethnic communities in the United Kingdom with greater impacts and create the platform to hear your silent and unheard views in this hugely green community in the United Kingdom. Our channel, Ben TV, presents to you another live current affairs television program. Our focus on the program is to review and discuss issues around the diaspora community in the UK. The program offers you that unrestricted voice on issues affecting you in the UK. Join us live every Monday at 10 a.m. to 12 noon. Another business segment of Dialogue in Diaspora, 2 to 3 p.m. every Monday. But guess what? You know you can be part of the program. Just send us an email at bentelevisionuk@gmail.com. Dialogue in Diaspora, your voice, your opinion on our TV.